It's Monday, so Joe Lindsley is again on TVP World on Rachon. Joe, great to see you again. Where are you?
Yeah, hello from Lviv. I took the train in from Kiev this morning, and as I'm traveling through the Ukrainian countryside, it's full winter. It's covered in snow, and I can't help but think about. But 1 year ago, every single Monday or Tuesday for several months through the winter, Russia sent 80 to 100 missiles upon this country to destroy the energy grid, and that is not happening. And I want to keep reminding everyone of that. It's cold, but we have electricity and heat, and society is functioning.
Actually, 2 days ago, when I read a report from the Ukraine, and I read a line that one cruise missile was sent as I don't know how to call it, a partner of 20 Shahid drones. I thought exactly about what you just said and what you are constantly repeating. Russia seems to be run out of at least part of those cruise missiles. Seem to be far away from the beaches of Ukraine because of activity of the Ukrainian fleet, but still we cannot call those successes, because what Ukraine did on the Black Sea is, there is no doubt about it that this is a success. But Volodymyr Zelensky admitted in his latest interview for AP that the counteroffensive didn't go as good as he hoped to. He was criticized by Vitaly Klitschko in the Swiss newspaper. A kind of a blame game begins in Ukraine. What do you make of those voices?
Well, I think first we have to always step back and look at the situation. I mean, where we are compared to a year ago. 1 year ago, when Ukraine was having these horrible and incredibly huge, massive attacks, 80 to 100 missiles a week, there was no Hamas attack upon Israel. There was no, we have the stories of the border disruption now, where the heavy goods cannot get into Ukraine from Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary, or they come in very slowly due to disruptive protests. And then we have some internal, we can see some internal disputes within Ukraine. 1 year ago, when Ukraine was under dire threat, none of that was happening. And now we start to see these distractions when the threat is not as dire as it was a year ago. And I think we do always have to step back and make sure that we're being very keen to ask the question, is Russia operating in other ways to disrupt things for Ukraine in what otherwise would be a time of very positive headlines for Ukraine. But when we look at the statements that the mayor of Kiev, where I just was for the past several weeks, Klitschko, what he said to German media, obviously that's a big topic here. As we look toward the presidential elections, if there was not a war, would be in February. But under martial law in Ukraine's constitution, that there's no requirement to have elections. You're not supposed to have elections, but there's a lot of maneuverings happen. I know politicians who want to have elections. I know people who think it's a bad and dangerous idea. And the first thing to step back is, no matter what the politicians say, Ukraine is about the people. It's about the Maidan revolution. And I remember hearing stories about, 10 years ago from these months, starting in October, going up until February, this is the 10th anniversary of the Maidan uprising and the Revolution of Dignity. And there were several moments when different politicians they came to the main square, the Maidan in Kiev, and they tried to, sort of take the energy and, claim they were part of the revolution. And they said they would negotiate or do this or that. And the people they always resisted the politicians. They said, no, we're sticking by our demands and you cannot manage us. And so I think that's the one thing to remember, that is the mentality of Ukrainians. They cannot be controlled. They're not like Russians. And so no matter what these maneuverings are, this is really fundamentally about the people. Klitschko did make an interesting point. He said, because Ukraine is not a federalist country. And so the regional provinces, the oblast, are all functionaries of the central government. You could look at this from a political theory perspective as why that might be a problem. But Klitschko said it's the mayors, they're the only sort of resistance to the central government, because the mayors, going back to the days of the Maidenberg rights, for 1,000 years, the cities have had some kind of local government separate from the central authorities. And that's been the big project of the past 10 years since the Maidan Revolution, is restoring local authorities. So the mayor's voices have been very important. But what Klitschko missed, and this is where politicians are often not very careful, it's not just the mayors. It's an independent media. It's a civil society that continues to flourish, that continues to hold the powerful to account. And there have long been disputes between President Zelensky and Mayor Klitschko. There were accusations that the Kiev bomb shelters were not opened. Was it 2 summers ago when the Russians sort of amped up their attacks? But I think I encourage everyone who looks at this, because the Tucker Carlson crowd will look at this and say, "Oh, Klitschko said there's no democracy." That the fact that politicians can critique each other, the fact that media can publish these stories, as the Kiev Independent, for example, has the past several days, shows you that democracy and debate is inherent to the Ukrainian identity, especially in wartime. And so I think from an outside perspective, we have to see that this is sort of natural to have, but it's also a sign, if Ukraine was getting attacked like they were a year ago, we would not be having these conversations. These conversations are a luxury of some of the great successes that Ukraine has had, with caveats that we're about to discuss, I'm sure, as we look at this report from
Representative
McCaul.
The report is very interesting. I mean, I got a feeling that this is the exact thing that we've been discussing here for months. There are politicians who claim that, yes, that's true, that U.S. support is vital for Ukraine, but this support is insufficient. In many cases, it was too late. Too small amounts of certain weapon systems that were required, and they go and they come to the conclusion that this is not only a threat to Ukraine, because Ukraine is going to fight, the countries that are facing Russia are going to fight, but this is also a threat for U.S. global policy, which is the point that I'm making here for the last 2 years. What is the meaning of this document? What can you tell us about it? What is the meaning of this for the Congress and internal U.S. policies?
Well, but I think, Michal, before looking at what's contained within the document, this is documented by Chairman Michael McCaul of the House Foreign Affairs Committee from Texas. He's been a very rare voice. He's criticized Republicans who've not supported Ukraine, so these Ukraine skeptics. And he's criticized the Biden administration really since the beginning. He's saying, he's called them out in the beginning for not, and as they say in this report, it was, when it came to long-range missiles, it was the UK that led. When it came to tanks, Poland was the leader. The U.S. has followed in many ways. That gets missed because of the heft and the might of the United States. But the U.S. has been slow, and McCaul has been a critic. But he was joined in this, of the Biden administration. He was joined in this report by Mike Rogers, from Alabama of the House Armed Service Committee, and Mike Turner of the Intel Committee from Ohio. But the first time I saw this report was today on the train. It came out several weeks ago. There's been no press about it. There's been no chatter about this whatsoever. That's an interesting point. It's been ignored by the media. Secondly, today in the Hill newspaper in Washington, we have the Biden administration completely ignoring this report, and the reporters are not asking the Biden administration questions about this report. And so today in the Hill, we have a story talking about Shalonda Young. She's the director of the Office of Management and Budget, and she is saying that the White House is very urgent about Ukraine, saying that we are out of money and nearly out of time to provide more weapons for Ukraine. And so there's a dissonance here, and this is where we have to be. Washington can be very slippery and sneaky is the first thing to remember. The second thing, there are many people, and I know this because I started my career working for the people who push for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. There are people who profit from long wars, not quick victory, but long wars, and they profit from it. And there are others who think that that's in the benefit of the United States to always be a war far away from us. We have to keep in mind that those people are probably operating here. But for the Office of Budget
John,
and Management of Budget from the White House.
What is the way that you read it? Because on one hand, it's obvious. We know the history of the wars in general. Wars always come with big money. But on the other hand, we got an imminent threat for the U.S. global dominance, which is the #1 condition of the U.S. as a state global position that comes with huge money. So it's a kind of a tricky and dangerous game.
tricky and often deceitful game. And so this is when I look at that, what the director of the Office of Management and Budget was saying. I mean, it's fundamental. It's not just the Biden administration. It's part of Washington culture, a fundamental dishonesty with numbers. And so they're saying, we've already gone through $111 billion in military aid for Ukraine. And they have to know when they say that the Republican opposition or your regular people in America who are overwhelmed are going to say that's too much. But that's not, as Mark Thiessen pointed out in the Washington Post last week, the United States is not actually spending $111 billion. Much of that is evaluation of old weapons that have come to Ukraine. And in this report by Michael McCaul and Mike Rogers and Mike Turner, they're pretty clear about getting closer to the point of clarity that the spending is not as much as it seems. And in fact, very helpfully, they point out that countries like Poland, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania have spent at least 1% of their GDP on Ukraine funding. United States is number 14 when it comes to percentage of GDP. It's much less than
but still being in that position is still number one in terms of the net worth of the weapons provided. Another interesting number, the authors claim that this is a little bit more than 3-point-something percent of the U.S. military budget, which was generally the Ukraine spending. On the other hand, the states that are bordering Russia or being threatened by Russia, which are the states that you just mentioned, are spending much bigger part of their military budgets for this. But this is in a way obvious. The thing is, and the question is, what is the meaning of the overall message that comes from this report? The authors praise Donald Trump's policies, which is like counterintuitive, because we are reading lots of news, and there are lots of quotes that can be quotes by Donald Trump that make him a politician who is not supportive of keeping the U.S. involved in the Russian war against Ukraine. It's a kind of contradiction in a way, but they still do. They are claiming that this is Donald Trump's policies, like javelin sending, that was effective for Ukraine.
Well, I think as we look at the rollout of weapons from the United States to Ukraine, and put yourselves to the extent we can in the mind of Putler, as you call him, Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin. For example, and as Michael McCaul and team point out in this report that no one's paid attention to, the Abrams tanks, that amazing fighting machine from the U.S., arrived in September, 3 months into the counteroffensive. It's like it looks like they don't want to help. They're so grudging with delivering these weapons. And then what McCaul and team they're not very clear about, but I wish they would be, and I wish the press would clearly ask this question. When President Zelensky was in Washington, September 21st, the White House said, "We're not going to give you ATACMS." They said it. It's on the record. We can see it. President Zelensky was upset about this. The next morning, Ukraine used the Storm Shadow missiles from the United Kingdom. I think it was 3 Storm Shadows, and they put such a hurt on the Russian Black Sea Fleet headquarters and the ships. They say, "Hey, look what we can do." And they did it. And hours later, the White House had an about face, and not a single reporter has challenged them or asked them why. And this is exactly it's these points where we got to pin them down to say, what are you actually after? What is your goal? But hours after Ukraine used the Storm Shadow missiles, the White House said, "Fine, we're going to send you some ATACMS." And within 5 days of those ATACMS arriving in October, this past October, Ukraine used them to destroy tons of Russian helicopters and airplanes that were on occupied territory. And no one has even talked about that. And so Ukrainians are showing how precise they can be with these weapons. But if you're Vladimir Putin and you see that, the White House gave these weapons that worked, but when they work, no one talks about it and the White House doesn't send more, okay, then all I have to do is wait. Maybe I pay some protesters in Slovakia and Hungary to protest and to block imports into Ukraine, and we're just going to wait until Ukraine bleeds out. And that's the situation we're in.
This is also another thing that is mentioned in this report: the ATACMS, the versions of different long-range missiles, but not the longest range possible in the arsenal of US. Again, we had like 20 ATACMS provided, and we had 16 reported explosions, each of them effective, as you mentioned, with tons of helicopters and other military stuff used. We got the results of using the long-range missiles and attacking the Russian Black Sea Fleet with those weapons and devices, and it is effective. And we have, and that's my final question to you, and we have also a statement, an interview, I didn't mention it in my opening monologue, but this is an important statement by Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO Secretary General. He said that we should be prepared for bad news. When you hear the NATO Secretary General speaking about the bad news to come, it means that there is some kind of broader discussion that we probably do not know about. And from my perspective, it looks like some kind of decisions were made that we don't know, that we just don't know yet, but the decision makers know those decisions. Do people in Ukraine know what Jens Stoltenberg is talking about? Well,
this is why I keep emphasizing, like, this winter so far is a success in many ways. Russia is not hurting Ukraine's infrastructure. Probably they know that it wouldn't matter. Ukrainians learned how to survive anyway, and they have to find other tactics. Well, all right, the first 3 months of the war, Russia thought, Ukraine would collapse and fall. First 3 days and then 3 months. That didn't work. And so then their next tactic was, we're going to destroy and freeze them out during the winter. That's going to get us to Russia's thinking that's going to get us to victory. Well, that didn't work. And then, so what is happening now is the behind-the-scenes maneuverings to paint the picture that Ukraine's losing when Ukraine is not, although we will change from winning to losing category the longer this drags on as more guys bleed out at the front. But what they're trying to do is to convince the world of a reality that's not true, and using every tactic they can. Perhaps also, Hamas's attack on Israel. Hamas is an ally of Tehran and Moscow, and all these things are ignoring obscuring the reality of Ukraine's ability, when they have the right weapons, to put a massive hurt on Russia. And so I think that, and then we start to see this war negotiating more and more and more. And even in Congressman McCaul's report, he said we need to get Ukraine weapons so they can be in a stronger position to negotiate. So even from McCaul, who's one of the clearest voices, they're still not talking clearly about victory. And so this is a fundamental unclarity, a fundamental, I think, failure to believe that victory is actually possible.
Yeah, and that's actually actually what the authors of this report the conclusion that they come to, that the victory should be the plan for U.S. also from the perspective of U.S. interests. Joe, we are out of time. See you soon. Thanks a lot. Stay safe. Lviv is close to Polish border.
As always, we welcome donations. UkrainianFreedomNews.com. Everyone has given so much the past weeks. And today is the Feast of St. Barbara, who's a patron of artillery personnel. And so if anyone wants to support those guys at the front while we wait for these weapons, we welcome support UkrainianFreedomNews.com.
You can find Joe and his NGO just Googling the name Ukrainian Freedom News, so do it. We are supporting the people who are fighting orcs that are invading our civilization. Joe, all the best to you. Stay safe.
Dziękuję.